Hello and welcome everyone to the very first installment of my new series, Animating Every Day Until I'm Good. Or as I like to call it, holding myself accountable so I'll actually do something with my life. I struggle really hard with intrinsic motivation if I don't have someone else around to kind of bounce my ideas and energy off of, and I don't often find making goals or deadlines for myself very useful because I'm a master procrastinator and I've been disappointing myself my whole life. So I've decided that the best way for me to overcome my listless anhedonia is to outsource that accountability to viewers like you. Basically, the theory is that if I feel like I'm failing someone other than myself by not getting anything done, I'll feel more compelled to force myself to sit down and make art. Lately, I've been really dissatisfied with my art, and I realized that I've kind of been futzing around these past couple years working odd jobs that don't get me any closer to my artistic goals, so while I'm working on finding a proper long-term job and ideally moving somewhere very far away, I'm doubling down on my efforts to both freshen up my portfolio and get my art to a place where I can be satisfied with it again. This week, my focus has been on quadruped walk cycles. The only one of these I've ever done was a study I did for class back in 2020 of my family dog walking, and looking back on it, it was so ass that it's a wonder to me that I was consistently making passing grades at all. Granted, it was for like my first year animating, but I never bothered returning to quadrupeds, and I think that did me a disservice. Luckily, I got super back into warrior cats out of nowhere after graduating, so drawing animals and like really figuring out what they look like and how they move became a bit more imperative to me. Naturally, I ended up starting with a walk cycle for a cat because I have a cat, I have plenty of videos of her walking, and I think that using a very basic and accessible reference for my first really intentional quadruped walk cycle was the best way to mitigate the stress of learning something new. I hesitate a lot to draw things I don't already feel comfortable drawing, which as an artist is insane because obviously you can't learn how to draw something until you do it over and over again. So when it comes to learning something new, I have to just accept that I'm going to be frustrated and then try to find every way possible to mitigate that frustration. Therefore, house cat. I always start my animations with a super rough breakdown of the motion I want just to put something to paper, because even if it looks super shitty, having something on the page at all is so much more approachable than that dreaded blank canvas. I spent a lot of time looking at other quadruped walk cycles before I jumped in, which also helped remove a bit of the mystique. I decided to make this cycle 32 frames long in order to slow it down from my instinctual 24 frames, and I also chose to keep things simple by having the back half of the body move exactly halfway offset from the front half of the body to avoid stressing too much about the details. The next part of my process is what I call adding circles, which is exactly what it sounds like. The purpose here is to create a simple shape, usually a circle, that I can copy and paste on every frame in order to visualize a cleaner version of my rough movement without getting detailed, and also to create a basic foundation that I can use to keep the shapes and sizes consistent across each frame. I don't have a super strong sense for three-dimensional forms, and I struggle a lot with maintaining consistency over several frames, so this is my cheat code to make sure I have building blocks to fall back on if I need to. This is especially helpful when I'm animating longer or more complex movements that aren't just an animal walking along the same plane. After adding my circles, I went in on a new layer and used the circles as guides to create a more fleshed out sketch. This is another step that I use to make sure I'll be able to maintain consistency in size, shape, and movement across the cycle. After I did this layer, I realized the head was turning way too much for each step the cat took, so I went back in on a new layer to try and tone it down to a more appropriate turn. This is when I decided which warrior cat OC I wanted to use for this walk cycle, so I whipped out a reference and adjusted the tail to match. One thing I would have done differently in this situation is chosen a character whose proportions more accurately match what I've already put to paper, because this particular OC doesn't have the elegant long legs that I think I may have overdone on the base here. But I like how it turned out otherwise, so I decided to just roll with it. This is where I stopped working for the first day, and the next day I decided to jump in with the line art. The line art is both one of the most satisfying and the most frustrating parts of animating for me. I love how giving myself a bunch of ample setup and construction allows me to just mindlessly commit to lining the character for hours at a time, but the frustration comes when I come up for air and discover that I've made mistakes that I need to go back and fix that I didn't pay enough attention to while I was hyper-focused on each individual slide. I can sometimes mitigate this by doing frequent scrolls through the slides as I finish them, but I personally really struggle to see the issues until I've watched the same loop back like 40 times. My process for lining is fairly similar to my process for all movement passes, which is to say I start with the first frame and then I jump to the next extreme of movement, which in the case of a walk cycle is the contact pose and the passing pose. After that I go in and fill in all the halfway points, which in a cycle is easy because I don't have to think too hard about where that halfway point takes place in terms of timing. I took a break after finishing the line art to work on a different walk cycle, but for the sake of continuity of the video, I'll just jump back into the coloring for now. Obviously, this is where I decided recording my actual process might be a good idea, idea, but unfortunately my computer is super old and has a really shitty battery that's been in dire need of an update for years now, so even with the laptop plugged in, trying to keep Clip Studio open and OBS and my like 50 other internet tabs drained her in half an hour, so I kind of gave up on that front. Anyway, this is the first time I've really colored anything I've animated in Clip Studio, so there was a good chunk of time spent just figuring out how to do that. But this morning I finally wrapped up the coloring and I think I'm satisfied with how it turned out. The liner was probably my favorite pass to watch because I feel like it shows off the motion a bit better than the cycle does after coloring, but whatever. Obviously there are some issues with the tail that need fixing, but I've decided to just kind of move on for now. The other walk cycle I started after this one is for a character I'm calling the God of Roadkill. It's a character I created for a kind of personal project I've been messing with for the past few years about a trio of young adults who go on this cross-country road trip to save the world. Super unique, I know. I wanted to create a kind of Percy Jackson-esque universe with a heavier Gothic Americana vibe, and this is one of the creatures I've come up with for them to face off against. Anyway, I start again with a rough sketch of what I want for the movement, the challenge here being that I want this deer figure to be limping, which means I won't be able to rely on my simple formula from the first walk cycle. To keep myself from getting overwhelmed, I decided to break the cycle down into the torso, rear, and head. The torso I decided to just go ahead and let it be a normal walk cycle because after watching a few videos of deer limping around, I got the sense that they didn't really let the pain impact their movement other than how it impacted that one leg, and since this is a mystical god creature anyway, I figured this movement is pretty much its default, so it's not going to spare a ton of energy agonizing visibly over its issues. The back half was a lot harder to nail down, but I decided to start by putting each contact pose at 0 3/4 of the cycle, as opposed to 0 1/2, like the standard I set for the cat cycle, and then just kind of feel it out from there. I went on to add a circle for the head kind of as an afterthought, but then I realized in the next pass when I was adding circles that I wanted the head movement to be offset by at least 4 frames to make it feel more like it was following the movement of the body rather than just happening at the same time. So I did an entire next pass of just the head to both commit to that change as well as to add the head turn I would want and maybe a bit of the jaw hanging off of the face, though I think the jaw needs another pass before I can really be satisfied with it. Same with the antler, I think it just needs a bit more attention, but I was tired so I called it a day. That's everything I managed to get done last week in terms of animating, and honestly it felt so good to actually get something done for once. I've been chipping away at a much longer animation, but I wish I'd done these cycles before that animation because this has really helped my understanding of how quadrupeds move. And it's also encouraging to look back at an animation I've done and not be crushed by all the mistakes within it. Obviously these aren't perfect and I still have a lot to learn, but I feel like the issues in these finals don't drown out the fulfillment I feel with the things I like about them, so I'm calling it a win. I think it will be fun to approach this series as a kind of let's learn together situation, and I'm super open to any tips or critique you guys may have in the comments. I want to try to get to a point where I'm posting these videos on either Mondays or Sundays, but I haven't really decided yet. Anyway, that's all for this week, and I hope to see you guys next time.